All right, Kavanagh Sisters, are you ready to go?
Yep.
All right, here we go. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Today, I'm honored to have back the Kavanagh Sisters. They were on the podcast literally a couple years ago, but it was a very impactful experience and episode for myself, and they've always been in the back of my mind, and I wanted to welcome back. And today I'm so glad that they're here. So welcome.
Thank you. It took you 2 years to get over us.
All right, I'm going to read your bio here, and then we're going to get going.
Right.
So the Kavanagh Sisters are 3 sisters born into a large family of 10 children in the late 50s and early 60s in a disadvantaged area of Dublin. Their father sexually abused them daily from age 3 or 4 right up toward their late teens. In 1989, they made the decision to bring charges against their father, and in 1990, the Irish state took a successful case against him. He was convicted and sentenced to a term of 7 years and was released having served 5. In 1992, the Kavanagh Sisters took part in a groundbreaking RTE documentary series entitled Tuesday File, Silent Scream, produced by Moya Doherty. Up to that point, RTE remind us what RTE stands for.
It's our main broadcaster. It's our main broadcaster. Radio share.
Okay. In Ireland. Okay. Up to that point, RTE programs on child abuse always had the interviewee's face hidden and voices distorted. But they openly volunteered to share their story, and despite the attempted injunction by their imprisoned father, the documentary was aired on RTE in October 1992. In September 2011, the book of their childhood experience entitled Click Click was published by Hachette Book Group and went straight to number 1 in the Irish nonfiction bestseller list. 2020 was republished under a new title, Our Father's Secret, in the UK by the Orion Publishing Group. The book has been described as, quote, a powerful, emotional, and sometimes harrowing story of childhood sexual abuse. Childhood sexual abuse is a crime that affects every aspect of one's life. It alters how one thinks and feels about themselves and all those around them, changes how we are in the world. One must develop a new way of being in order to cope. And because of this, what people are completely unaware of how profoundly they have changed. Folks, welcome. Before we get going here, remind our listeners where you're from originally and where you are right now.
Well, you just read it out. We're from Dublin, Ireland. Okay. We grew up in Ballyfermot, and we're located not too far from where we grew up. Well, 2 of us live in an area called Tala, and Paula lives in a different county. She's about an hour and a half's drive away from us. And that's where we're living at the moment.
Okay. So obviously a lot has happened since we last spoke. The world has undergone and continues to undergo crazy changes.
Yeah.
What have you been doing these past few years?
Well, when COVID started, we were already into doing all our own podcasts. But when COVID started, we actually took the decision to step back and actually look after ourselves, because we very quickly realized how we were being impacted by COVID, and over here, this ridiculous restrictions and everything that was happening. But I didn't fully understand how impactful COVID was until we took a step back. And it's really taken a long time just to absorb, because I think anybody who had trauma in their childhood, COVID had a different impact on them than, say, people who are looking to escape that. Because what it did for me in particular was it threw me back into trauma. So it threw me back into, I described it as the government to me became my father. So the government were the abuser. And because I took the decision not to get vaccinated, I felt I was on my own, and then the community around me were my family. So it was very similar reflection to what I had gone through as a child. So it was quite, put it this way, there was lots of lessons to be learned in it. So in that respect, it was beneficial, but it wasn't a very easy time.
And I've heard that COVID, the experience of COVID and culturally, how it's impacted us, has impacted people who've experienced trauma.
I think it is because it's a reflection of somebody having control over you again, which was the restrictions that were in place for everybody, and telling you when you could go and where you could go and who you'd go to, and only listen to me, don't listen to anybody else, I'm the only one you can listen to. So it's very reflective of what an abuse experience would be.
Mm-hmm.
And that coercive control that happens all the way through it. So I could totally see why abuse victims got triggered left, right, and centre from the very get-go.
Yeah, it would have been very triggering, experiencing the lack of control you had over your own life. It was the complete powerlessness of it all. And that would have brought you right back to your childhood. And the fear involved in a sense of knowing that we're being lied to and being powerless to do anything about it, and not knowing that there was an end in sight, because the restrictions just kept coming thick and fast, and no indication of where this would end. It was quite scary, and it impacted us on a very deep level, and we really felt that anyone who experienced childhood trauma would have been triggered to the same extent. I think everybody was triggered. Right. And I think everybody was impacted, and without knowing it, everybody got some insight into how a child would feel going through trauma, because they would have had to experience a sense of what we experienced as children.
Which is a great opportunity, because we have been trying for years to try and explain to people who say they haven't experienced trauma as a child, to explain what it was like and why you don't make decisions. Like, I remember people saying, well, why didn't you just run away? Or why, surely being homeless was better than living in the hell. But to explain to somebody when you're controlled why you wouldn't get up and move away, because choice is only choice if you know you have one. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know I had one.
And it was very, like, you were on the periphery, because we all chose not to be vaccinated. Over here, you were only allowed to eat in a restaurant if you were vaccinated. Mm-hmm. So we were like the lost puppies walking by, seeing people sitting in restaurants eating, and we couldn't gain access. Mm-hmm. Like, it was very upsetting.
Yeah, but it wasn't really that we didn't want to sit in a restaurant.
No,
the fact that you were told you couldn't.
Yeah,
it's like childhood thing, and then also the lack of trust, because we didn't trust anyone.
Yeah.
You couldn't actually say out publicly that you weren't being vaccinated, because
it wasn't safe.
The way the government operated was to turn one against the other. That not only were we responsible for all that's happening, but we were now spreading the disease because we chose not to be vaccinated. So it was like another secret you had to keep. It wasn't safe to open up and discuss that in public, or you would be attacked or turned on. So it was just crazy.
And plus, it's really hard to watch people around, which I wouldn't have realized at the time, but it's really hard to watch people around you, everybody around you, full of fear, which is exactly what we would have experienced growing up in a house with 10 children and with my father being the abusive one. So that in itself is a real looking glass into your past.
But isn't that very good that other people were given an opportunity to understand how trauma would affect you as a child, but we were also given an opportunity to see the other side of it. Like, we were asking questions like, why didn't they move? Why are they not asking questions?
Yeah,
you know, this kind of thing. So it was very good, but traumatic.
And we
did have each other, though. Yeah. We always had each other, and we were able to discuss and acknowledge.
Paula couldn't get access to us at one stage.
We weren't allowed to travel.
Yeah. So the whole thing was, but like, for us, we felt much happier at making the decision to just focus on getting ourselves through it, minding ourselves. And
so we did take a step back from a lot of the work, and we've continued to work with people. We work with a group in particular who train volunteers who work with sex offenders who are released from jail. So they work in a group called Circles, where they keep them accountable, get them homes, and get them back into the community. And the idea is to do it as safely as possible. So
hang on. So you work with a group of people who help volunteers who work with sex offenders.
Yeah.
Wow. Let me come back to that, but I want to touch on your podcast. Were you collectively doing one podcast?
we had done quite a few of them. So we would do.
But I
we
mean,
did
you
the
each
first-
don't have your own podcast. You
No,
get-
no,
okay.
we as a collective have
What's your podcast called?
the Kavanagh Sisters.
The Kavanagh Sisters. Okay.
No, it's
And
I changed it.
okay. And it's still up, but you've taken a
Yeah,
break.
yeah. And we did the first few of them. We did each podcast we did at the beginning. We did on a particular condition that we had experienced as a child, like disassociation, compartmentalization. So we did that as an open discussion between us to try and make sense of it. And then we interviewed, say, the CEOs of all the services that are here, like the
Mhm.
Rape Crisis Centre, like 1 and 4, like Harvey. So we did interviews with people who were dealing with or supporting other victims. And then we also interviewed other victims who had their story out and were capable of talking
Wow,
about
that's
it.
awesome.
We're at that stage. So, and we learned lots doing that part of it.
Yeah.
It's constant, you know, you
Yeah.
learn from other people constantly.
Sure,
from
sure.
Even the discussions we had through the podcast, we were amazed at what came up and the more and more learning we got each time we did it. It was amazing.
Right. Well, good for you. I'll have that. If it's okay, I'll have it linked up at the show notes page here,
yeah.
traumatherapistpodcast.com. So this whole story you're sharing about almost re-traumatization of the experience of COVID sounds harrowing to me. It just sounds like, where can you go to get relief, right? It's constant. Now this is happening and it's re-triggering, bringing you back again. How did
Awareness.
Go
I
ahead.
think if you're aware, if you get to a point, like at the start, it was happening around you, so you're just absorbed in it. So you're in the shock trauma bit of it. But when you become aware of what's actually going on and why it's getting triggering, that can actually be quite freeing in a peculiar, sick way.
Yeah, it kind of gives you a deeper understanding,
Uh-huh.
another layer of understanding of what you went through as a child. And it does, if you can understand it, and every time you discuss it or find out something new, it's just like, it's like years ago we used to be described in counseling as peeling an onion. And
Mhm.
there's so many layers to it. And that's all it is. It's simply getting to a deeper understanding of your own life and why and how it affected you the way it did.
And it absolutely helps you to be more compassionate. It helps you feel like, it helps you see other people differently. Now, we're the worst. Well, I would be the worst at judging everything around me. That has not stopped. But I would, on reflection now, be aware and have compassion for somebody and kind of see where they're coming from. Or if I don't see where they're coming from, at least understand there's something behind what you're looking at. The behavior is just an outside bit. It's what's behind that. So I wouldn't be as easy to get embroiled in it now.
Mhm.
Like I've taken a step back from social media now because with COVID, oh my God, I was getting into discussions on Facebook, which were so not healthy. So
Mhm.
it's about keep pulling yourself back in and go, okay, that doesn't work. That's not healthy. That's not saving anybody.
But I suppose what really got us through is having each other to talk to. Because if I know it was certainly, if I wasn't able to communicate with these two, and I have a very good friend as well that I visit, and we'd be able to discuss how we felt about COVID and the restrictions. And then you felt like you weren't going insane because
Right.
it just felt like, it really did. It felt
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the world was going fucking mad.
Yeah.
Being able to communicate with somebody safely, you
Right.
know, without fear. Even on social media, it wasn't safe to mention it because you were absolutely lambasted and you just felt like, this is scary. Like,
Yeah.
you really thought the world has gone out of control. And people who you respected and looked up to and admired were spouting stuff that I just felt, oh my God, like,
Mhm.
you know, it just felt if we didn't have each other to communicate with, that would have been a lot worse.
The biggest problem, I think the one that was the most reflective of being in an abusive situation was you were told you hadn't the right to question. You were
Mhm.
told you hadn't the right to hear a different opinion or give a different opinion. And that was what was most reflective
But it
of our
wasn't,
childhood.
it wasn't even told. In keeping the secret,
Yeah, you played into
it
it.
disabled you from communication
Yeah.
about anything, your feelings. Your job was to stay safe, stay secret, be invisible.
Yeah.
you
That's
know,
true.
so that was all your energy went into that. You didn't even formulate that thought consciously. That's just what happened in school and everything. That's all your focus went into, not having any attention. And that's why when each of us discussed in school, if anybody ever addressed you by name, I actually went white. My vision
Go
just
again?
went. I saw.
Sorry, every time.
I know I should say this in a minute. My vision went. I just saw like white in front of my eyes. I don't know what I must have looked like on the other side, because I couldn't see a thing. I was just shocked that somebody was addressing me personally. Joy said that when somebody spoke to her personally, she cried. She cried all the time, disproportionately.
Wow.
Joy, Paula soiled herself, and that's why she.
Yeah, she has to tell it every time.
But like, they were big signs, you know, for if somebody was educated and was looking for signs, they were big ones. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Let me ask you something. I want to talk about the podcast, but I want to kind of go back to the work you're doing with this volunteer program. Say a little bit more about that. How did you get involved with that, and what is it?
The organization is called PACE. What does PACE stand for? Do you know?
Just stick with PACE.
Right, okay. They are involved in a program called COSA, which is Circles of Support and Accountability. And they gather together volunteers to work with reintegrating offenders back into society after they've served. Now, ideally, you'd want to broaden that, but at the moment,
it's like, you know, when you get out of prison, you're on kind of probation.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're on probation for 2 years,
they can accept them into the program.
Like, some of people's sentences restrict them from getting access to this program. They have to have enough time to be able to work with you legally. Without you could sit it.
And as far as I know, they don't work with high risk offenders. It's more the medium to low risk is where their focus is mostly, because the high risk falls into a whole other set of criteria. And it's not that they don't work with them, but the circles of support they'd be more focused towards therapy and that kind of assistance for them.
But it's also about making them aware of the impacts of their own behavior, because we believe you cannot change sexual abuse or eradicate it unless you deal with all aspects. And unfortunately, pedophiles are aspects.
It's not the aspect, it's the cause. Like, we're just putting out fires, and nobody wants to work with offenders. Most people are appalled at the prospects of giving them help. But until we, you know, evolve enough to recognize that change is not going to happen unless we go to the source of this problem and start moving towards prevention rather than a cure, we're wasting our time. We're going to be sitting here in 30 years' time having this same conversation. And so, although it's not palatable for a lot of people to consider this prospect, we have no choice.
But how did you three get involved with that? Did they come to you?
Yeah, they just asked, would we give a talk about our experience?
And they also
we just
heard of our views and how
our books.
The fact that we weren't having like a punitive approach to offenders married well with their objectives.
But let me take a wild guess here that you didn't always have this approach.
Oh, no.
Absolutely not.
Okay, I'm just saying, right? Probably didn't.
It's a
Many
process.
people would be like, are you on crack? I'm not going to help these people.
And that's why.
Let me ask you, how did you shift? What helped you?
It was a process.
Yeah,
and it came out of our own healing, that we have delved more into our own behaviors than a lot of people in our position would have done. And we did it because our lives were so miserable. We were driven we wanted to be happy. And we had tried so many things. We'd gone through therapy. We completed therapy. You know, at the time we did a sexuality course that rounds off the whole package that they call, you know, this cure. The cure for your childhood abuse.
And we were more fucked up after it than we were before it. So
because going into therapy at the time now, I mean, they would get you to recall the events that you lived through. Discuss how that made you feel, reassure you that you were completely innocent, all completely appropriate. And they'd wrap it up in a nice bow, and you'd have a sexuality course, so you'd be considered finished, you're done. So we would walk out the door and we'd go, what the fuck? Our lives are still shit, because all of that stuff is very necessary, but it's the tip of the iceberg. The stuff that's going on underneath the surface is all the psychological damage, and that's what absolutely destroys your life. And in fact, you become your own, you do more damage to yourself than the abuser or the abused.
It's the hidden impacts that are the problem. So when, for instance, when we went into therapy, you were dealing with, say, the memories that you could recall. Now, considering we were all abused nearly every day of our childhood up until we were in teens, you can't recall a whole lot. You just have a few of really brutal rapes that kind of stood out in your memory. So you can recall them in whatever way or shape or form. But it's all of the other things that, how did you escape? What did you use to not be present at the time? How did you save that memory? Where did you put that memory? How did you survive as a child when this was a daily occurrence? It's trying to get to them. Like, how did you psychologically do that? And then what damage is caused to your brain without you realizing the lasting damage that abuse does to your brain development on a physical level. Like, to even understand that for us was such a relief, because we knew we weren't right, but we thought what we had wrong was our character. Right. So the bits you didn't like about yourself, you just had to get on with it. But we needed to know, why do we feel that way? Why do we behave that way?
Yeah, we didn't make the connection with the abuse. We thought the abuse is what we dealt with in counselling, in therapy. When we came out and discovered our lives were still miserable, we just thought, well, that's what you're left with. That's, you know.
But if you remember when we were in counselling, the whole aim and the discussion was the integration. One, we didn't know what the fuck that was. And two, we didn't know how to do it. And the only reason we did integration was when we wrote our own book. Then we were delving. And then it was like the penny dropped. Yeah. And we got it. But up to then, we had no idea what that meant or how do we do it.
Yeah. For example, when you're being abused and you use your disassociation, so you completely remove yourself so you don't have to experience it. I personally believe now, and only now, after years of getting in there and looking at all the muck, that's exactly what abusers have to do. There's no way somebody could be raping a child who's screaming and crying and you're causing them physical hurt and pain, that you could do that unless you are just as disassociated as I am. And that's our belief, that abusers have to have used a lot of the same techniques that we would have used in order for them to do what they're doing. And the only way you'll get them to even be willing to go in there and have a look at their behavior and what they're doing and the cost of what they're doing to the child is if they understand there's something at the end of it, that they are human. So if you can give them some little tiny bit of humanity and some compassion and tell them it's worth them going in to find out why did they do what they do, because you'll never stop a behavior if you don't know why you did it in the first place. It just can't be stopped. Yeah. You can put a plaster on it, but you can't stop it.
But how we arrived in a place that we're even willing to consider this is the work we did on ourselves, because we discovered, we wanted to understand why we felt the things we felt, why we had the opinions we had, how we could talk to a man who has done so much harm to us. And we discovered we had every syndrome and condition and, you know, under the sun. Like Stockholm syndrome helped us understand why we would have, like self-preservation, we would have befriended the abuser in the hopes they wouldn't hurt you so much. Like, we found out there were conditions, there were names for all of the feelings we had, that has been researched for years, and it's also been connected with sexual abuse victims. So we didn't reinvent the wheel. We did our own delving. Then we went looking for information that would confirm what we were feeling, and we realized it's all out there. Everybody knows this stuff, but attachment disorder is normally associated with children going to school, having difficulty attaching from their parents. But in fact, we discovered we had all of the symptoms of attachment disorder, and it was wrecking our lives in relationships and everything. Are you seeing it?
That's Joyce's. It's just saying that signal.
Okay, sorry.
Because if we could offer any chance, we'll just go back into the meeting, because it just said the internet signal is low.
But yeah, anyway, as we identified each condition and delved into it, we once we became aware that we had these conditions, we understood our behaviours, we started forgiving ourselves for what we previously thought we were bad people, we weren't nice, we had horrible attributes, and there was no forgiveness, we were unredeemable. Self-hatred is the biggest thing you'll carry out of being an abuse victim. So as we slowly picked away all the ways that we thought we were these awful people, we started finding some compassion for ourselves. We started to feel there's happiness and
hope.
Yeah, and we just felt like when you start arriving at that place, even fragmented, it won't be all in a gush. You're not going, life is not a bowl of cherries or anything. We're still going to be working at this ship forever. We're nowhere, we're not finished. You know what I mean? We're work in progress, and we always will be. But when you arrive at that place, you start to consider then your abuser's position, and only then are you in a position to have any consideration for where they might be. Your views change. It's a natural evolvement. You can't even help it happening, because you see that any other option holds you to ransom. Any other option but forgiveness is hurting you, not them. And so it opens up a whole new avenue of possibilities. Then you start seeing clearly that there's no other way to deal with this, only go directly to the source. So
let me ask you something. When you're working with these volunteers, and how old are these individuals?
They're young, old, middle.
Okay, so all across the board.
All walks of life. So there's police, there's ordinary people in school, there's students, there's doctors, there's the shopkeeper. The idea is the circle is as random.
Yeah.
Okay, and they're not clinicians, correct?
They're male and female.
But they're not licensed therapists. They're not clinicians.
No. Okay. All they're doing is holding the abuser to account.
Okay. So do you work with them in a circle? You work with them in a
circle?
Okay, so you're working in a group setting.
Yeah.
Walk us through briefly. What do you do? What do you say to these people? What do you say to these people?
We tell them they're gold. They are golden. They are their future.
Usually by the time we meet them, they have doubts. Should they or shouldn't they? But
they don't tell people they're doing it.
We tell them our story, our abuse, and then we thank them for what they're doing, because we firmly believe unless somebody does it, it'll never change. Things will never change. And then they're usually, when we're finished, they're usually on board 100%.
We can't believe that there are people out there, so many people out there that are willing to do this work, but they're doing it under an umbrella of secrecy again. They're afraid to speak openly about what they do. They are relieved when they hear victims they consider like that. They're expecting victims to hate them, to attack them.
Right.
So when they hear our story, they feel relief and they feel reassured that they're on the right path. And we reassure them that, thank God they exist and that they're willing to do this work.
And we're in a lucky position because, like, as the professionals that are in the job and who are training them, they can tell them all they like about what you're doing is important and we really need it. But coming from a victim, it means more because we know the importance of them doing the work they're doing. And we admire them for doing the work that they're going to do. And the fact that they're all ages and they're a complete cross of society, it's absolutely amazing because it is the only way. But they also, the point of us telling our story to them is you can't hold somebody to account if you don't know what they did and you don't understand the impacts of it. So they need to be as fully up to date on the long-term impacts of abuse, so that when they're holding this guy who's sitting in front of them to account, they know what they're holding to account for.
Now, what does that mean to hold them accountable? What does that look like in this
to
context?
Stop them making up stories.
Like, I didn't do any harm. There's no marks on them. They're getting on with their life. I was just showing how I love them. I think it's a beautiful thing, and they can tell themselves all sorts of things, and you want to shatter that illusion, you know, just break through that crap.
And a lot of them won't even own up to the grooming process. So if you could even make them aware of their behavior in that grooming process before they ever get to full abuse of a child, if you can get them to understand those steps and get them to see and talk through, well, if you've seen a child today, were you triggered by it? Did you want to do anything about it? That's what they're there for, because you can't put people on a planet with no children. There isn't a place. So they have to be in communities. If they're in communities, they're going to come into contact with children. If they're coming into contact with children, then you need to be able to hold these guys to account by asking them and by making them check in with themselves. Did you get triggered? What did you do when you got triggered? Where did you go with that? Did you go to your counsellor? Did you check in? So it's that kind of process, so that they are constantly, and they're also, so they don't feel they're in the world on their own. They have a group of people they see every week.
And you
They'll
think
talk
about,
to them.
yeah, think about it. Where would they go? We were just saying, if any of our children came to us and said, listen, I'm having these feelings, where the fuck could they go? Who can they turn to? They're classed as scum of the earth. And like they couldn't possibly get help, even if the help was to come before they could act. And that's not right. How can you stop anything if you just ignore it? Call them monsters, lock them up, whatever.
The story. Yeah. There's a story we tell usually that, yeah, you know, just you have to personalize it, because until this hits home, most people don't feel anything. We always believe that never happened to me. But if you imagine yourself, you imagine your neighbor knocking on your door and telling you that their daughter has just been raped. They tell you about what happened to their daughter.
No, to your daughter.
No, their daughter. They tell you their daughter has been raped. They start telling you how they were raped, what happened to them. Now you imagine that abuser, what you would like to happen to that abuser, how you'd like that abuser to be treated. And now imagine them knocking at the door and telling you their daughter was raped, but it was your son that did it. And that usually changes the way you want to know now, why did my son do that? Why would he behave like that? What can I do to help him? You have to always personalize it if we're going to get anywhere. Imagine your own child coming up with this. Imagine yourself having these feelings. You'd fucking never tell anybody, because why would you? Your life is over. You've nowhere to turn. You're absolutely considered the worst thing on this planet.
And if society keeps sending out that message to anybody who's abusing or thinking of abusing or having inappropriate thoughts and feelings, especially with the growth in online porn now, if we're telling them that there's no hope for them and that society doesn't want to know who you are and you better get away from me because you're just scum, that's not going to encourage anybody to get help and to stop them before they get to the point of acting on what their thoughts are.
There's huge work to be done in the whole area. There's so many changes needed. You can't begin. It's so big. Yeah. You have to start from where you're at, do whatever you can, and let's just tackle it. Let's start.
And there has to be an attitudinal change. And it also has to be helped and assisted by the likes of the media. So when they're reporting on an abuse case, they don't use language like he was a monster and he's an evil man with horns on his, because it's the guy who's standing beside you in the queue going to the shop. It's the guy on the bus with you. It's not. And now I do believe now it's going to come out that more people will talk about being abused by women. So we have to understand that that's the society we live in. You can't be thinking they're monsters. You have to be thinking, what can we do to help, support, and stop it?
I think your position on this, each of your positions, it's very admirable how you've evolved, because I think a lot of people initially would say, yeah, this person is a monster. They did this to my kid. And
we did too. You know, to be very clear, we did too.
Right.
And it was a long time before we would be making these kind of statements.
And I wanted to set my father on fire. And I wanted him to die every time he left the house. And I was hoping he'd die in a car crash. So it's not like we didn't have all that hate and rage, because it took me a long time to let go of that. But when you let go of it, then you're freer and then you see things clearer.
As we kind of wind down here, let me ask you this. Are things changing in Ireland at all? Is there more
changing,
awareness?
but not fast enough. And like
no,
they're not.
Very minor.
Yeah, but there is some changes, like
slight shift. But the government does not fund the services that are qualified to help victims. They don't fund them adequately. They spend most of their time doing charity.
And they've waiting lists.
They've waiting lists, so you can't. Even if you ring up to get into the rape crisis centre, you have to wait a year before you get in. That's not a move in the right direction. Right. That's the problem we have, is how do you get the people in power who have the right to make the decisions, to make them based on the realistic cost of not doing it? Because if that's all they're going to go on, we need to show them the cost monetary cost of what it is if you do not give support to a victim of abuse. How many people is impacted by that one victim that's going around, and then how many people are impacted by the abuser? Their lives are fucked up. They're no longer, like for us, your education suffered, you couldn't get a job, you had low self-esteem, you weren't a productive member of society by no means. So if we can get that across, then they might put at least some money behind getting to support our people, because at the moment they just don't see it. They don't see it.
This topic is very interesting to me, and I don't know if I've talked about it on this podcast, and to hear the three of you talk about it and the way you're dealing with it, and the energy that you're and the compassion that you're putting behind it is very inspiring. It really is.
Thank you.
And yeah, I mean, I'm just every time I talk to you three, I'm like, Jesus, you're amazing. You really are.
Yeah,
And
we are.
you are, and you might not realize it because the three of you are, you've got each other. But to hear you speak, and to hear you talk about your healing journey, and to be very cognizant of the fact that it was a journey, right? You're
Long.
a long one, and I'm sure it
and
is.
That's why you can't blame anybody for not having this opinion, because we know how long it took us to get here. But we have to try and help people see that you can't stay stuck back there hating them, wanting them castrated and put on an island. That's okay to be there. It's understandable. You just have to, don't stay there.
You also,
it's not good for anybody.
You have to show victims there's a point to you delving into your past, that there's a reason why you go back into all that pain and examine it and look at it, that there is hope and there is a life, and it'll be much better if you don't bring the pain and suffering to your death. And not only that, you inflict that pain and suffering on everybody that's in your life, because it seeps out of you without you even realizing, and you impact everybody. So there is a reason why you do the journey, and it's all positive, even though it feels like hell.
Yeah, look forward.
What is the best way for people to get in contact with you?
On our webpage, this is probably the easiest way for people to contact us. The KavanaghSisters.com.
Okay.
And the Kavanagh Sisters at gmail.com. Like, it's fairly simple.
Okay.
We've made it idiot proof because we're idiots.
And the podcast is out. I'm very excited about that. I'm very excited to listen to that. Congratulations. Look, you three, whenever you want to come back on this podcast, shoot me an email and we'll do it. You're amazing and you're inspiring, and I honestly mean that.
Thank you so much.
You're not too bad yourself.
I appreciate that. All right, be well.
Thanks, Megan. Bye.
All right, take care.